All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Don't color me shocked that that Florida State has decided to take the Atlantic Coast Conference to court as they're seeking to get out of their grant rights deal with the league that runs through 2036. And of course, this plain and simple comes down to the financial gap between the Big Ten, the SEC, and everybody else. We've heard earlier from Florida State as far as part of this being them, ticked off from being excluded from the college football playoff. And I think honestly, them being left out of the playoff just triggered this a little bit more. It was already there. And I think, that was the last fuse that needed to be lit to, get this powder keg going, if you will, for Florida State. And this is a pivotal moment for the ACC as they look to hang on as a power conference. And the thing is this, either you try to deal with this or face the realization of possibly going the route of the Pac 12, Southwest Conference, and the Big East for football. Now, if Florida State is able to win out and they don't have to give the ACC $130 million dollars to say adios, then it's going to open up Pandora's box. And I say this because I guarantee you if Florida State leaves the ACC, which they more than likely are, they're not leaving alone, as they're more than likely going to take Clemson and North Carolina with them. Now, of course, just prior to the start of this college football season, we saw the ACC add Cal, Stanford, and SMU, and we all knew that it was not going to be enough to keep, Florida State happy. This was a scenario where the ACC was simply trying to protect themselves if schools started to defect, and it's going to happen. Now, in the case of Florida State, and this is going to be very interesting, does the SEC or the Big Ten want them and the others? That's going to be the $1 million question right here because Florida State has basically put themselves in the transfer portal. The two conferences that they want, it's going to be interesting to see if they want them because the other alternative would be the Big 12. But I don't think that the Big 12 is going to give Florida State the money that they're seeking. They're seeking Big 10 and SEC money. So this is going to be a very, very interesting situation is going down right here. Now, if Florida State does leave the ACC and it starts a mass exodus from the conference, would this league still be viable enough to survive? I say that because clearly, if Florida State leaves, like I'm saying, I really do believe that Clemson and North Carolina are going to go with them. So you'd still have Miami, you'd still have the two Virginia schools, you'd still have Syracuse, you'd still have Pitt, you'd still have Louisville and Georgia Tech, just to name a few. But is it going to be enough? I'll tell you like this, because over the last 20 years or so, every time that the ACC needs schools, they've just either plucked the Big East Conference when they had football teams or the American Conference. And I think that could once again be the scenario again. I could, and I wouldn't be surprised if the ACC started losing schools, plural, that they went back to the American and picked up a Memphis, a Temple, and a Connecticut. And I know people, or Connecticut from the Big East rather, but I know people are going to say, why? You get a Temple for their media market, the Philadelphia market. You've already got the Boston and New England market with Boston College, but why not bring in another school like Connecticut? I'm just saying this hypothetically because I think that part of it would be truly a long shot. And then Memphis, because Memphis has some alumni with deep pockets there. And it would give you a geographical aspect, still in the South, a geographical rival with the likes of Louisville. Uh, but I tell you like this, a lot of this just comes down to the fact that just like the Big East, the ACC has been hurt by Notre Dame not becoming a full member. It's like Notre Dame flirted with the Big East back in the 90s when they said, you know what, we're going to join your conference for everything except football. And long term, it hurt the Big East. And we've seen it now where Notre Dame has basically done the same thing. The only time, and they showed that they could be viable when during COVID, they were a full football member and they split their NBC money with the conference, and it worked at least for the conference. I still say when it's all said and done, and I've talked about this recently, Notre Dame's going to have to join the conference. It's going to be interesting to see how their next TV deal looks like, and that's going to be telling for them. But nonetheless, not having Florida State join the ACC as a football member has definitely hurt this league. So I'll tell you like this, there's no way, and I mean absolutely no way that Florida State and the ACC are going to be able to work this out. Florida State's basically giving the ACC their notice, and they ain't staying. And it's going to be one of those things where I guarantee you the Seminoles are going to be out of this league within the next 5 years. And I keep saying this, and I probably, go on to sound like a broken record, but the gap between the haves and the have nots in college football continues to swell. And a 20 team football conference is right around the corner, as it's going to be the superpowers and everyone else. Like we keep saying, it comes down to money. We've seen teams leave leagues before because they felt like they weren't getting their fair share of the pie. Remember, the original Big 12 almost crumbled because you had schools not thrilled over Texas and Oklahoma getting a bigger piece of the pie than them. So, what have we seen since then? We've seen conferences dole out the money on even footing. Florida State saying, wait a minute, we carry this league. Clemson carries this league, and we shouldn't have to share the money equally. So at the end of the day, the money is always going to be a problem, especially when there's not balance. Because if you're a Florida State and you're seeing the schools in the Big Ten making twice as much as you, or the schools in the SEC making twice as much as you, and you're saying, wait a minute, we've got a national brand. We've got national championships. We've got college football Hall of Famers, pro football Hall of Famers coming out the wazoo from our program. What about us? So again, like I've said before, with this whole realignment thing, and this realignment thing is never going to go away. It comes down to the fact that college football, like some people have mentioned, doesn't have a commissioner to oversee things. And my big thing is college football needs revenue sharing. Some people may not want to hear this, but college football at this point is not just like, but it's turning into pro football. You got these young kids with these NIL deals. They're getting more money than they had never dreamed of at the collegiate level, which basically they're like pro contracts at this point. All right. The TV exposure, the money going around for these schools, these coaches, these institutions as a whole, it is a business. And not only it is it a business, it's big business. So the bottom line is what's next for Florida State and the ACC? Like I said, Florida State is leaving this league by hook or by crook. You've got the lawyers involved. And of course, the ACC feels like they have an ironclad statement as far as their grant of rights, which Florida State signed. The Florida State people, and I'm sure their attorneys have looked over this and said, you know what, we can get out of this thing. They're going to use Maryland as an example when Maryland left the ACC about 10 years ago to join the Big Ten. Bottom line is Florida State's leaving. How much is it going to cost them? We got to wait and see. The ACC initially, they're going to be steadfast in trying to get the 130 million out of Florida State if they want to leave. Florida State obviously is going to try to leave on a discounted rate. I think they find a happy median. Where it is, I'm not sure. But like I said, it's going to open up Pandora's box because let's be realistic. If the Big Ten or the SEC want Florida State, they could clearly have them because Florida State is shopping themselves. But it's a scenario where Florida State's got to know, hey, you're not going to get a full piece of the pie going in right away. But Florida State's going to say, hey, the smaller piece of the pie that we get from you is still better than the full piece of pie that we are getting from the Atlantic Coast Conference right now. Now, like I talked about a couple of days ago, geographically, it would make sense for Florida State to go to the SEC if they decided to leave the, oh, not at this point, if, when they leave the ACC. It's a scenario where, hey, you have a lot of recruiting if you're Florida State in that region. Clearly, you recruit the state of Florida heavily. You also recruit the state of Georgia. I'll tell you like this: you already have the rivalry with the Florida Gators, but then Florida State competes with the likes of Georgia, with the likes of Alabama, on the recruiting trail. I've talked about Clemson as well. Clemson's already gotten the Palmetto State rivalry with South Carolina. But then you're talking about on the recruiting trail, Clemson recruits heavily with the likes of Alabama, with the likes of Auburn and Georgia for top talent within the Southeast region. And then again, I mentioned the North Carolina factor a couple of days ago. From a football standpoint, it works. But then also from a basketball standpoint, you're talking about putting North Carolina in the same conference with Kentucky. But I guarantee you, if North Carolina decided to leave the ACC, there would be anarchy. Because can you just imagine for a minute Duke and North Carolina, basketball wise, not being in the same league? Tobacco Road would never be the same. But I'll tell you like this, and like I've continued to say, tradition and rivalries, unfortunately, have long left collegiate athletics. And it's just one of those where, hey, you know what? These folks out here are chasing money and they can really care less about it. So if we could put Texas and Texas A&M on hold for a decade, if we've seen Georgetown and Syracuse go away basketball wise in the Big East and so many other rivalries, guess what? It could possibly happen to Duke in North Carolina as well. Maybe the Big Ten decides that they want Florida State. Maybe they want to go that route. I'm not sure, but anything is possible. 3 years ago, did any of us think that we'd be talking about USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington in the Big Ten? Did we think that what they were basically wouldn't be a version of this Pac-12 conference or a Pac-12 conference without Cal, Stanford, USC, Oregon, UCLA, and others? Things are just so unpredictable right now. It's not even funny. And I think, like I said, the gap between the haves and the have-nots are going to continue to grow. Where they're going to be distancing themselves, the superpowers of the sport, from the other programs. And like I said, a 20-team league is right around the corner. And don't be surprised at some point in your life that you don't see a 25-team college football conference. So for Florida State, it's gotten to this point because of money. They want their piece of the pie. They're not getting it from the ACC. Uh, they're not going to get it from the Big 12. The Big 12 could go after them. We got to wait and see. But I think if Florida State is truly seeking the money that they want, they have to get it from the Big 10 or the SEC. So what's going to come of this thing, I'm not sure. But I'll tell you like this battle between the ACC and Florida State is going to get a lot worse before it gets a lot better. Florida State ain't alone because there are other schools in the ACC that are not happy. But this right here could either pave the way for them to get out, or we're going to have more issues on our hands with a school that clearly doesn't want to be there. Which way will the ball drop in the ACC? Only time is going to tell. So, folks, that's going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. Now, before I get off of here, I would be remiss if I didn't show some love for a guy who's dropping some comments in the comment box. Steve Peter, how are you doing? Happy holidays. I hope all is well. And I wish you nothing but the best in the coming year for 2024. So, folks, that's going to wrap it up. And as always, this is William Martin, and I'm signing off and saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.